The Nuremberg trials were missing a major criminal. Millions of people around the world were hungry for retribution, for it was he who had unleashed the bloodiest war in history. Politicians in their offices and soldiers on the front lines were sure, after the victory, Hitler would be brought to justice. But the Führer of the Third Reich disappeared. According to the official version, he committed suicide. But there's another theory. He managed to escape and hide in South America, like many high-ranking Nazis. On April 30th, 1945, Soviet troops stormed Berlin. The battles were already in the heart of the Third Reich. The Reichstag was in flames, and Hitler realized it was the end. The will is written. He knows that partisans hanged his ally Mussolini upside down in the town square, showing off his mutilated body, and Hitler has no doubt something even worse awaits him. But he has no intention of giving his enemies the opportunity. The Führer's last refuge is the concrete walls of his underground bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. Here, deep underground, his cronies have been hiding for 4 months. Eva Braun is with him. She is his lover, with whom he had officially married the day before, on April 29, 1945. And the next day, at 2:30 p.m., they locked themselves in his office. Soon, a gunshot rang out. When the valet opened the door, he saw 2 lifeless bodies in front of him. The chronology of their last minutes of life is recorded accurately to the second. Eyewitnesses described the adjutant and valet taking the bodies out into the garden, dousing them with gasoline, and setting them on fire. The fuel canisters had been prepared in advance. The first attempt to burn the bodies failed. Then they made a torch out of unnecessary papers and documents. The explosions of shells rumbled very close by. They threw the burnt remains into a shell crater and covered them with soil. Later, the bodies of 2 German Shepherd dogs were found there. They were poisoned and placed next to their master. What happened next was revealed only in 1980, when Soviet documents were declassified. On May 2nd, Soviet troops entered the Reich Chancellery and bunker. They found traces of blood on the sofa in Hitler's office. A few days later, unidentified remains were dug up in a shell crater. The remains were sent for examination. Fragments of the skull and jaw made it possible to identify the bodies, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. But the story doesn't end there. Something strange happened to the remains. They were reburied several times and then completely destroyed. Only the jaw remained, which, according to reports, is stored in the archive of the Federal Security Service in Russia. And a fragment of the skull with a bullet hole is stored in the state archive. Everything was so classified that the Americans immediately began to doubt it. Some researchers are sure the Soviet Commission did not find any bodies, and the whole story of autopsy and reburial is just disinformation. Soon, conspiracy theories began to emerge. If there is no body, there is no proof. But there's one detail we can't ignore. The jaw is real. It was identified by 2 independent witnesses, the assistant of Hitler's personal dentist and his dental technician. And in 2018, French forensic experts dispelled all remaining doubts. They compared the jaw with Hitler's X-rays from 1944. But things are not so clear with the skull. Researchers say his frontal bone is too thin for a grown man. Does that mean Hitler was a woman under the age of 40? Or does the skull belong to someone completely different? The Führer's trivial death seemed too simple, too ordinary to many people. Did he really just shoot himself? That's it? But if Hitler didn't die in the bunker, then whose remains were found in the pit near the Reich Chancellery? And where did the Führer himself disappear to? Potsdam Conference, July 1945. Joseph Stalin and U.S. Secretary of State James Byrnes talked in a relaxed atmosphere. Both were trying to maintain a light tone of conversation. Byrnes asked, "So is Hitler finished?" Stalin replied, "He's not dead. He's escaped to Spain or Argentina." Later, Byrnes described this dialogue in his memoirs, but he didn't clarify whether Stalin was joking or speaking seriously. 7 years later, President Dwight Eisenhower admitted that the United States had failed to find reliable evidence of Hitler's death and suggested that the Führer had managed to escape. Each country continued to keep information about their investigations classified. And as we know, rumors and speculation inevitably arise if there is a lack of information. Another important evidence for supporters of conspiracy theories is the so-called rat lines. the secret escape routes of Nazi leaders organized by the Vatican. Many war criminals escaped through these routes. For example, Dr. Albert Heim, who was dubbed Dr. Death, he tortured prisoners in the Mauthausen concentration camp and then lived for a long time in Cairo under the name of Tariq Hussein Farid. Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death from Auschwitz and the architect of the Holocaust, Adolf Eichmann, both also hid in South America and lived there safely. If they'd managed to do so, could Hitler have done the same? There are several key conspiracy theories about the fate of Adolf Hitler, and they all have one common point. The Führer managed to escape and died of natural causes, far from his homeland. However, the versions of these events are very different, from quite logical to ridiculous. One such theory claims that Hitler escaped from Berlin and his double died in the bunker. The basis for this hypothesis was an unusual find in the garden of the Reichschancellery, a corpse with a bullet hole in its forehead and a distinctive mustache, which Hitler had. He was later identified as Gustav Weiler, a man who, according to some reports, could serve as the Führer's double. Conspiracy theorists claim that there were several such people with similar mustaches, and in support of their words, they referred to the book The Strange Death of Adolf Hitler, published in the United States in 1939. The anonymous author, supposedly a Nazi officer, claimed that the real Hitler had been poisoned in 1938, and since then, 4 doppelgangers had replaced him for various purposes. In 1945, after the body of one of the doppelgangers was found, the theory of Führer's death acquired new shades, and the story of burnt remains in a shell crater gained unexpected credibility. There are also more unusual versions, most of which have a very specific origin. They're mostly based on the interpretation of the book The Morning of the Magicians, published in 1960. The author of this pseudoscientific work, Jacques Bourget, was a member of the French Resistance, a self-taught alchemist, and certainly a man with a vivid imagination. The book claims that the Nazis were connected to secret orders and occult societies in which they learned ancient knowledge. Hitler, as the most powerful among them, certainly could not have died under ordinary circumstances, such as on a sofa in a bunker. This idea was widely disseminated in the yellow press. One of the most incredible theories claims that the Nazis made contact with the inhabitants of Agartha, a mythical land hidden beneath the surface of the earth where superhumans dwell. According to this version, superhumans took refuge in underground territories in ancient times, and only chosen ones, such as Hitler, could get there. Some conspiracy theorists even claim that the entrance to Agartha was right in the bunker, so Hitler could easily escape there. More enlightened theorists believe that this way was opened in Antarctica, in the so-called New Swabia. As a matter of fact, the Nazis did own territory in Antarctica, called New Swabia. However, its main purpose was quite simple: to build a whaling base to extract the fat needed to make margarine and soap. However, such boring stories could not compete with fantastic stories about hidden in Antarctica Nazi citadels, keeping occult artifacts, and preparing the attack of the Fourth Reich. According to one of the versions, Hitler was transported to Nova Swabia by submarine. In support of this theory, they quote Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the German submarine fleet, who said, "The German submarine fleet is proud of the fact that we have built for the Führer an impregnable fortress on the other side of the world." Of course, the veracity of this quote is very doubtful, but it fits the world of conspiracy theories quite well. But there are even more bizarre stories. One of them, which became the basis of esoteric Hitlerism, claims that Hitler left Earth on a flying saucer. Does that sound absurd? Absolutely. But esoteric Hitlerism is a specific ideology based on the writings of French writer Savitri Divi and Chilean diplomat Miguel Serrano, who claimed that Hitler was an incarnation of the god Vishnu. They claimed that the Führer suffered a temporary defeat in 1945, but would surely return in his fleet of flying saucers and establish an Aryan order on Earth. Another version, based on similar fantastic ideas, claims that Hitler headed for a Nazi base on the moon. There is evidence that the Nazis may have been developing experimental flying machines in the form of discs. A former member of Mussolini's government, Giuseppe Belluzzo, as well as some German engineers, have spoken of this. This story may sound like science fiction, but it still lives on in the world of conspiracy hypotheses. According to another theory, the Nazi leadership had secret knowledge that allowed them to use the magical energy of vril to create flying saucers. According to the theory, these machines could have taken Hitler to a secret lunar base hidden on the dark side of the moon and were designed for such purposes. However, as it turns out, the first mention of a Nazi moon base was a fiction by writer Robert Heinlein from one of his early stories. Also, despite the efforts of the United States, lunar colonization has not yet been accomplished, so this theory probably doesn't have any valid basis. Conspiracy theories were becoming more bizarre with each year that passed since Hitler's supposed death. However, one theory deserves special attention. Hitler may have fled to Argentina, as did many other high-ranking Nazis. In Argentina, the Germans enjoyed the warmth and support of the local authorities, and there they found a comfortable refuge for many escapees, including war criminals. Some of them became useful to Western countries as professionals, while others, having enough money, were simply looking for a safe place to live. The president of Argentina, Juan Perón, was actively involved in the process. The USSR, having evidence of Hitler's death, did not search for him, but the CIA, and especially the FBI, investigated the most credible evidence. Recently declassified documents have added even more mystery to the story. One of the first materials uncovered was the story of someone named Adolf Hitler, mentioned in CIA records. These documents contain only one photo and a brief report from the informer. In 1955, a CIA agent met Philip Citron, who claimed to be a former SS officer. Citron proudly told of his close acquaintance with Hitler, saying that the latter was living in Argentina under a fake name. The agent was skeptical, but Citron provided proof, a photo of him sitting next to an older man with a familiar mustache and hairstyle. The name written on the back of the photo was Adolf Hitler. Despite the convincing details, the agent found no additional clues and the case was closed. However, much more intriguing material emerged later, when the FBI declassified its documents. In July 1945, an FBI informant got information about a man who introduced himself as an employee of the Argentinian government. He said he was one of 4 people who had met Hitler and his cronies on the Argentinian coast. He agreed to tell the whole story in exchange for security guarantees, as a coup had just happened in Argentina. Events unfolded as follows. A few weeks after the capture of Berlin, 2 submarines arrived in Argentina with a crew of about 50 people, members of the Nazi elite. Among them was a man of about 55 years of age, accompanied by a woman, probably his wife, and several officials. The man complained of deteriorating health, mentioning worsening asthma and stomach ulcers. His carelessly shaved mustache and stubble on his upper lip remained in the memory of the informant, who confidently claimed that it was Hitler. The delegation was sent to the nearest city on horseback. The source insisted that he knew the exact location of Hitler and his 2 doppelgangers. It was a house in the middle of nowhere, where a secret door hid a passage to a bunker. The informant promised to reveal details, but disappeared, leaving only vague descriptions and theories that went no further than the level of sensationalist articles. The agent concluded that the escape of Hitler and Eva Braun from Berlin the day before the arrival of Soviet troops was quite possible. However, in his opinion, Argentina was a very unlikely option. The Führer didn't speak foreign languages, and it would have been difficult for him to avoid attention in South America. The agent considered Switzerland a more likely destination. It remains unknown whether the intelligence services considered this version. The search for Hitler in South America continued and went beyond Argentina long ago. Now the attention has turned to Brazil, Paraguay, and Chile. Perhaps someday the search will reach the moon. Thanks for watching this video. It would be great to know your opinion. What do you think of the theories about Hitler's fate? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel.